Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Today on the program, Diosdado Peralta named as the new Supreme Court Chief Justice.
The Supreme Court has officially received a copy of the appointment papers of Diosdado M. Peralta as the 26th Chief Justice of the Philippines.
Leading the judiciary in the next 3 years.
This is Justice Dado Peralta, who I consider as an elder brother. I can imagine a court under Peralta.
But with the President appointing most of the High Court members, can the public be assured that the institution will remain independent?
You can always be sure that the Supreme Court will be very fiercely independent. Kasi ayaw din namin yung bansag na rubber stamp lang kami ng executive.
Also, when is the right time to invoke the arbitral ruling?
Without necessarily flaunting it, you engage them, negotiate so that they will, over time, respect our fishing rights, hopefully give us concessions.
And will the West Philippine Sea dispute be resolved under the Duterte administration's watch? Retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Francis Jardeleza joins us live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pinky Webb. President Rodrigo Duterte has chosen Diosdado Peralta as the new Supreme Court Chief Justice. Peralta is set to lead the High Court in the next 3 years. How will he unite the justices of the Supreme Court, and can he guarantee judicial independence under his watch? Also, a retired justice now willing to help in the discussion on the West Philippine Sea. He was one of the defenders of the country on its case against China in the arbitral court. Let's go straight to the source of the story. We have retired Supreme Court Associate Justice and former Solicitor General Francis Jardeleza. Associate Justice, good to have you. Maraming salamat for your time.
Thank you.
Chief Justice, I need to get used to it. Diosdado Peralta, because we just had Lucas Bersamin on the show. He is the next Supreme Court Chief Justice. What are your thoughts on this? Was it a surprise, or was this something you expected?
Well, I think everybody had, each of the three candidates, but Chief Justice Peralta is the most senior in terms of years in the court. He is very respected. He is an expert in criminal law. So my opinion is, I'm very highly confident that he will be a good leader. He is even-keeled, balanced. He takes care of everybody. And I think the whole court, the Supreme Court, and the judiciary welcomes his being the head for the next 2 or more years.
Would you say, it's about time? I asked that Associate Justice because during the interview with the JBC, he got a little emotional, and he actually said, he's not an honor student or valedictorian of such sort, pero nagtatrabaho siya. And, basically saying that it's as if he deserves to be Chief Justice.
Yes, in fact, I complimented him for that interview, and I said it was, he got emotional, and for me that was from the heart. He has, he lectures almost every week, I think. His passion is a continuous trial, so that we have trial which will not last indefinitely, and he's very passionate about his position. So I think he will make a good and a great Chief Justice.
Chief Justice Lucas Bersamin described himself during an interview with us, sir, as a healing a Chief Justice. How would you possibly describe the kind of, or describe the next Chief Justice, Diosdado Peralta? If Lucas Bersamin was a healing justice, who would Diosdado Peralta be?
I think Chief Justice Peralta will continue certainly the healing process. But as the healing process improves and keeps improving, I think we will see probably his own stamp of leadership. So I think but it's continue. The healing, I think, continues.
You retired, Associate Justice, September
Yes.
26 was your birthday. You served 5 years
Yes.
in the Supreme Court. Was the Supreme Court, for people like me who's always been very interested about what goes on within the Supreme Court, was it something that you expected? What was the one thing that you expected from the Supreme Court that is true? And what is the one thing that you expected from the Supreme Court that was not true? Or disappointed you? Or
Well, no disappointments. First, what I did not figure out was the load. The load of the court is too much. There's too much on the plate of the justices. I did not realize that. It was a effort to keep up with it. I hope we make do with less cases.
And how do you solve that? How can that be solved?
I submitted the report to Chief Justice Bersamin because he sent me to the United States to observe the American Supreme Court, where they take, for example, in 2016, they only took 80 or more cases out of around 6,000 filed.
That's such a small percentage.
Yes. In contrast, we received for the same year about the same number of cases. But we took on so much more. So I have a study, but
Can you share it with us?
well, we'll wait. We will ask Chief Justice Peralta now. I
Look into this,
hope he will allow that to be publicly available. But I am sure that I believe Chief Justice Bersamin has constituted a committee to act on it, probably make a plan so that there will be a plan on how to decongest the Supreme Court's docket.
I guess it makes me think, because how do you decongest that? I know you're not at liberty really now to talk about it, but if there's so much work on the Supreme Court justices, and then you have a citizenry or a public that thinks, medyo mabagal ang trabaho talaga, not just in the Supreme Court, but in the lower courts as well. There has to be a formula by which this needs to be resolved at the soonest possible time, because justice delayed is justice denied, sir.
I agree. And that's why my recommendation to the Chief Justice now, Peralta, is that probably the court should consider that in making the plan, they should involve, as you said, the citizens, and specifically this probably should involve the integrated bar and the academe, the law schools, because any plan would succeed, in my opinion, only with the help
And
on the
cooperation.
inputs of the public.
Would it include increasing the number of associate justices in the Supreme Court?
My own view is probably 15 is already sufficient. It's really just being more selective in accepting cases.
I got that, sir. I bring up one interview by Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio with our Justice Correspondent, Angelo Mario. He said that maybe in the future, in some future time, I think is the word he used, we need to look into the appointment of Supreme Court justices. And a formula he raised was 1/3 should be appointed by the President, 1/3 by the legislature, and another third, I believe, by members of the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. Sir, is that favorable? Would that work?
Well, I would not really know. But that has been, in varying forms, suggested. The Chief Justice Puno, when he headed this committee to look at amendments to the Constitution, actually they wanted to expand the court to 4 different courts.
That's true.
And the appointment process is something along those lines.
You have do you not favor that? Why? Because, again, in 2022, President Rodrigo Duterte would have appointed about 14 of the 15 justices of the Supreme Court. I think that only leaves one person, one associate justice whom he did not appoint, which is Associate Justice Marvic Leonin. So hence, the question on the independence of the Supreme Court is being raised. So if there is a change in methodology by means of appointing Supreme Court justices, could this possibly strengthen what is called the independence of the Supreme Court? And is that something you would favor?
Well, not necessarily. My own view is that a justice, after he takes his oath, grows into the job. So it is not fair to say that a justice who is appointed by a president will always vote in favor of the president. I believe there are many instances in the U.S. and here that there will always be surprises because, as I said, the justice grows into the job. You take an oath. When you take an oath, of course, you're grateful to the person who appointed you, but at the end, you do, as a judge, is look at the facts and apply the law.
So the appointing president becomes a little bit of not a priority anymore when deciding cases, you think?
In the first place, it should not be, because once a justice takes his oath, or his or her oath, you do a job which is look at the facts, look at the law, do not mind who are the parties, and Lady Justice has the scales. You know.
Yeah. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Francis Jardeleza. Associate Justice, which resolution or decision was hardest for you to make in your stint at the Supreme Court?
Probably the martial law cases, because there were 3 cases that ultimately went up to us. And in the first case, I voted in favor of martial law for the whole of Mindanao. But in the second and in the third cases, I voted against it. So that was difficult because you are very conscious about what people will say. And in fact, when in the second martial law case, I changed my position. But it is understandable because the facts changed.
Yeah.
So in the first case, I was convinced that there was this threat, there was a shooting war. And the difficulty was, the shooting war was in Marawi, but should you have martial law for the whole of Mindanao? In effect, I voted in favor of giving the benefit of the doubt to the government and to the armed forces. In the second martial law, in my view, the facts had changed dramatically, so that there was no more reason to continue martial law, not even in Marawi, much less in the rest of Mindanao. And on the third case, I was even more convinced.
Yeah.
But that was probably the most difficult because I studied during I took up my law course during martial law. You have this natural antipathy against martial law, and for me to write a decision favoring was difficult.
But I guess that's a classic case of really you have to really look into the facts and kind of separate yourself from whatever experiences you had in the past, or
yes, that's what I mean. That you grow into, once you take an oath, you're not a student anymore. Yeah. You're not somebody that this is your opinion.
So I'm assuming, Justice, that if you were still in the Supreme Court now, if there was an extension, you wouldn't favor that anymore.
Well, I was asked that in one forum, and I say I will not give you my view in advance of looking at the facts.
Okay, it's not in advance, so I'm going to ask you your view on a decision that was made very recently, an 11-2 on the vice presidential protest. Where would you have voted on that? Well, that's the past.
Yes, but that's also speculative because I saw the report, but I was not part of the debate. I had retired by that time, so it's not fair, I think, for me to say what would have been my decision.
But you were sure of a decision. You were 100% sure of where you would have voted.
At that time, of course, I read the report. You make a tentative view.
The Justice Kagiwa report.
The Justice Kagiwa report. But then you haven't heard the other view. So you always withhold final judgment.
This is a very important decision. Imagine that's 11-2. You have 2, Justice Kagiwa and Justice Senior Associate Justice Carpio saying this should have been dismissed. So actually, my next question was, I was going to ask you, does the PET on the nullification of votes, does the PET cover that, sir? I don't know if you're going to answer that. Was it within the mandate of the Presidential Electoral Tribunal to look into the nullification? Because if you say nullification, would it just include the vice presidential votes, or would it include the other votes?
Well, I think generally it is the mandate of the PET to decide on all of those questions. But again, I think so far what has been done only is that they refuse to throw out the case and will continue. And in fact, they have asked for memoranda, I think, from the parties.
For the nullification,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
So you think it's a sound decision?
Well, again, people will differ. I mean, as you said, 2 justices said, don't even ask for memoranda anymore.
Yeah.
Let's dismiss it. 11 said, let's hear first let's hear the parties again. And the Supreme Court is a collegial body, and that's one justice has only one vote. However strongly or fervently you hold dear your own opinion, that's why it's called an opinion.
Yeah. We'll be taking another short break. We'll be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Francis Jardeleza. He led the team back in 2014 with regard to the arbitral ruling against China. But I really wanted to ask you, Justice, how do you feel that sometimes people criticize that move of bringing this issue of the West Philippine Sea to the arbitral court?
That's a matter of opinion, and people have the right to have their opinion. And I am aware that there are people who believe that from the get-go that the case should not have been filed. And that is why I led the team, the legal team, that studied it very well. And we had to look at all angles on whether it was in the national interest to go ahead and file the case. But there were many people. There were even people in the cabinet of the President Aquino then, who were not keen on it.
You stand by it until now, sir? Do you stand by that?
I stand by it because under all the circumstances, when the debate was made, the study was made, I was there, the pros and cons. Ultimately, of course, the policy judgment call was made by President Aquino. Now, my opinion is that was the right call.
And now that you're retired, you're saying that you can actually, you're willing to help the government in this issue. So how can you help, sir? Must we assert this? Should it be done while bilateral talks are ongoing? What's the next possible step?
I think that the way I can help is like in a forum like this, explain that what do we do now that we won the case? Okay, the background will be when the case was filed and when we filed the case. Even from the start, it was very clear, and we made this position clear to to foreign audiences. The dispute with China in the final analysis will be resolved only by diplomacy. Okay. We went to the court only because we felt it was in our interest and to our advantage that we get a ruling from an independent, impartial, respected tribunal on many of the legal issues involved. So there was a risk there, whether we can win or we lose. But by the grace of God, we won. And so the theory, the thinking was, if we win the case, then when we negotiate now through diplomacy, the win will strengthen our hand. And that is where we are. But that's not the end of it. How I can help in the conversation now is the question. So how best do you implement
Assert
the decision?
it or implement it?
So
Yeah.
the question is not we should defend our sovereignty because we should. The question is, how do we defend our sovereignty? And that's where you are now. Do you do it bilateral or do you it
Go ahead, sir.
multilateral?
And I think that in an interview, you already said that this has to be done bilateral.
Yes. Well, in the interview, I said the government has done bilateral. The government. My opinion is we are better off with bilateral.
So the president is on the right track, would you say?
I believe the government is on the right track because there are, at the present time, I believe there are many advantages to bilateral.
But I guess, sir, the code of conduct, how important is that be already put forward and agreed upon?
The code of conduct is very important. And in my view, it is being helped by the fact that we're implementing the decision bilateral.
Okay. We're running out of time. I have two last questions very quickly, sir. This joint exploration between the Philippines and China, the possible joint exploration, is this a good idea? Are you in favor of this or not? With regards to, both our claims on the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, sir.
We should conduct exploration because without exploration, we cannot even find gas or oil. Now, joint is a misnomer because it sometimes invites different and inaccurate interpretations. The characterization should be the reed bank is within our EEC, and therefore we do exploration. Under the Constitution, we are allowed to take in parties as technical advisors. So I think so much debate has focused on that joint. It is joint in the sense that you allow them, but the lead is really should be done by the country.
Anyway, if we look at that, sir, that the president is saying that definitely it was a 60-40 sharing, if anything at all. So.
Well, because 60-40 in a joint venture is the floor.
Yeah.
If the president gets 70-30, then probably better.
Yeah. All right, we've run out of time. Thank you so much to retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Francis Jardeleza. Good to see you, sir. Maraming salamat po sa inyo. Thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.